listen closely, because an enormous shift just happened around you, and you probably haven't noticed it yet. A specific person in your orbit is growing deeply fixated on you. And here is the part that will unsettle you far more than it compliments you. It is barely about who you believe yourself to be. Rather, it is entirely about what you unknowingly triggered within them. And the moment you finally recognize it, you will never be able to look away. You endured so much time feeling unseen, as if you poured out your soul and got absolutely nothing back. But then, a transformation occurred. You hit an emotional limit where you simply walked away. You quit pursuing. You gave up justifying your existence to those who refused to truly comprehend you. You quit seeking approval in the gaze of others, and instead, you finally began discovering it deep within yourself. That exact pivot, that undeniable action you took, sent ripples across your entire reality, and this person sensed it. They felt it to their core. You assume romance is founded on physical draw, perhaps common interests, right timing, all those safe elements. But relying on that thought is merely a shield, because safety is an illusion. The reality of profound connection, that consuming intensity that steals someone's sleep, does not stem from reason. It originates in the shadows of the mind. And you, entirely by accident, wandered right into a corner of their subconscious, a space they have kept locked away for decades. You morphed into a presence they never anticipated, a force they were unable to manage, an entity they could not label. And that shattered their psychological framework entirely. Here is the secret most individuals miss. When a person feels truly understood at that profound level, not just glanced at, but deeply comprehended, they do not merely appreciate you. They bond with you fiercely and totally. This is not them spiraling or acting out. This is raw reality. You sparked a sudden awareness, an unearthing of something hidden, something suppressed, an emotion they were never meant to face. Yet somehow, you transformed into their reflection. Not through effort, not by putting on an act, simply by existing. And right now, they are looping your most recent interaction continuously in their mind, like a glitching record that will not pause. Not because it is their choice, but because they are helpless to it. They are trapped because you are now linked to a fractured piece of their soul, an open wound, and these lingering psychological patterns are undeniably the strongest drivers of human action. You can sense it in the way their eyes lock onto yours, can't you? That bizarre gravity, that underlying friction, as if an invisible current is flowing even during moments of absolute silence. Because there truly is. But this is the exact point it becomes hazardous. When you shift from being a mere human in their world to becoming a concept, a fantasy, a manifestation of all the things they fail to grasp. You didn't just bring them joy. You illuminated their darkest corners in a manner that absolutely petrified them. And here is where the situation turns significantly more complicated, because their emotions for you are not pure. They are far from straightforward. They aren't even completely intentional. It is a chaotic blend of craving, terror, deep projection, and a fixation bordering on madness. You dismantled their peace. And to a sleeping mind, this kind of emotional earthquake feels exactly like fate. In the vocabulary of the hidden psyche, humans do not simply love other humans. They fall for representations. And you evolved into a monument of what they misplaced, or a prize they were denied, or a treasure they were convinced they were unworthy of. This is the exact moment it turns agonizing for them, because falling for you demands they face their own hypocrisy, a massive divide within their own spirit. One half of their mind desperately craves your proximity, while the other half pushes back with terrifying strength. Not out of apathy, but because this attachment reveals the very trauma they have spent decades outrunning. And this marks the descent into even murkier waters, because this silent war refuses to stay buried. It bleeds outward via second-guessing, erratic behavior, and flashes of extreme vulnerability instantly replaced by bizarre, chilling detachment. You experience this firsthand, right? That psychological roller coaster. That unmistakable feeling of an invisible magnet dragging them into your orbit while a separate force violently yanks them back. But listen to the reality here. They are not unsure of who you are. They are drowning in their own reflection. You have triggered a domain in their brain that rejects reason. A sector governed entirely by raw feelings, hidden flashbacks, and stifled cravings. A zone that holds onto memories their waking mind successfully erased. And the second this dormant piece awakens, it demands answers to riddles they cannot solve. Inquiries such as, why is this sensation so recognizable? Why does this connection terrify me to my core? Why do I crave this presence while desperately wishing to flee? This is precisely when their psychological foundation starts to crack. Not in a loud way, not with outward drama, but deep within, in total silence. Because the waking brain demands order, yet the shadows demand closure, and closure usually demands destruction. So, what is the next step? They begin manufacturing space, not because they wish to abandon you, but because they are desperate to reclaim their steering wheel. They lie to themselves, believing that pulling away will silence the noise, that physical separation will provide focus, that the passing weeks will dilute this intense bond. But here is the absolute reality. Walking away does not destroy a psychological tether. It only amplifies it, because physical absence strips away the mundane and substitutes it with pure fantasy. And the realm of fantasy is exactly where fixation blooms. At this stage, you transcend being a mere mortal in their daily routine. You morph into an icon, a canvas for every feeling they are incapable of processing. And these mental creations possess terrifying power because they lack boundaries. They expand, they mutate, they shift into something flawless, something sacred, something absolutely essential for survival. And this is precisely why escaping becomes an impossible task for them, because their loyalty is no longer to the real you. They are addicted to the deity you have become in their thoughts. Yet here is the detail that makes the situation infinitely more overwhelming. They refuse to trust this dynamic. They are deeply suspicious of the sheer force of their emotions. They question the rapid speed at which this developed. They doubt the profound impact you have on them, believing that anything this potent carries a devastating price tag. And their subconscious is painfully aware of this. Therefore, it builds walls, skepticism, and terror, not to annihilate the affection, but to shield their ego from the sacrifices this love will require. Because fully surrendering to their feelings for you means standing face to face with every demon they have successfully dodged, every stifled wish, every unhealed scar, every buried reality. And the human brain does not walk into that fire voluntarily. Consequently, they linger in the gray area, torn apart by opposing forces, craving your touch while fighting your gravity, obsessing over your memory while dodging your texts, experiencing a hurricane of emotion while showing a blank face. This breeds a suffocating pressure that refuses to dissipate. It accumulates gradually in the shadows until the dam inevitably bursts. The architecture of the mind simply cannot sustain such violent extremes indefinitely. Soon enough, it fractures. And when that snap happens, it rarely looks the way you predict. Occasionally, it results in a passionate admission. Other times, it triggers complete isolation. Frequently, it manifests in choices that appear entirely unhinged, perhaps even ruinous to their own life. Yes, genuinely reckless. Because the instant the hidden mind seizes the wheel, rational thought dies and pure feeling dictates reality. It becomes the absolute rule. That is the exact second the paradigm shifts. The crossroad where pretending this is a simple crush is no longer viable. The exact time they must acknowledge the true weight of this connection. You can sense that inevitable collision approaching, regardless of their preparation. Because the fire you lit within them is far from fleeting. It is not shallow. It is not a minor inconvenience they can brush off. It is an awakening that insists on a conclusion. And finding that peace constantly requires a sacrifice, every single time. The lingering mystery is simply determining what pieces of their life they will burn to escape the reality of loving you. Eventually, the brain gives up the bargaining phase. Keeping secrets has a ceiling, and the obsession they harbor for you has long shattered those boundaries, utterly destroyed them. You can detect this during the quiet pauses between your conversations. That dense, borderline choking atmosphere that simply refuses to fade. It hangs there because the internal landscape of their mind has lost all stability. It is a pressure cooker, and psychological buildup always demands an exit wound. However, that eruption does not always bring enlightenment. Frequently, it arrives as a total breakdown. This marks the phase where the ordeal turns excruciating for them, because this has evolved past simple infatuation or passing interest. It is a full-blown reckoning, a brutal standoff with fragments of their identity they have dodged for decades. Pieces forged by ancient heartbreak, past abandonment, and toxic inner voices repeating, "You are inadequate. You are overbearing. You are too dangerous to hold." And then you walked into the frame. Without a single ounce of effort, you shattered every single one of those lies. Yet, a traumatized mind rejects new evidence. It pushes back. It battles. It twists the narrative. Because letting you in requires demolishing the entire foundation of what they assume about their own worth. And that demolition is never peaceful. It is brutal, emotionally savage. Therefore, rather than embracing the cure, they break apart to avoid it. A fragment of their soul drifts toward you, hungry for intimacy, desperate for the fire, starving for the relief of truly being recognized. Yet a secondary defense mechanism yanks the leash, hissing warnings they can barely process. This is a trap. This ends in blood. This strips away your armor. The deeper they plunge into this affection, the more naked they feel inside their own skin. And to a guarded subconscious, vulnerability translates directly to a lethal threat. Not merely a risk of a broken heart, but a fundamental hazard to their very existence. Because you have surpassed being a simple crush. You are now a wrecking ball aimed at their coping mechanisms, a direct peril to the mask they wear to endure life. And defensive masks do not melt away quietly. They strike back fiercely, often suddenly, and frequently with toxic results. Thus, they begin spinning tales, inventing fiction to justify why this bond is entirely ordinary. Whispering excuses like, "Perhaps this is a passing phase. Perhaps my mind is playing tricks. Maybe I am just reading too much into things." Yet, their goal isn't to decipher the truth. Their sole mission is to quarantine the emotion. Acknowledging reality requires confessing a truth they are terrified to vocalize, that this phenomenon, whatever name it holds, is absolute fact, and it roots deeper than any romance from their past. Nevertheless, regardless of their mental gymnastics, their nervous system refuses to lie. Their shadow self ignores the excuses. That magnetic drag in your direction never fades. It simply multiplies in the dark, without mercy, as if a voice in their bones is screaming that this connection is vital, that this changes everything, that walking away is fundamentally impossible, and attempting to brush it off begins to poison them, affecting their mood, their focus, and genuinely taking a physical toll. Because burying a massive feeling does not erase it. It mutates it. It morphs into chronic pacing, severe panic, and this unshakable dread that they left a vital piece of their soul behind. Naturally, you form the nucleus of this panic, not by their conscious design, but because their deeply wired instincts have fused your image with their actual survival, an element they cannot substitute with any other human. This marks the exact era where the facade crumbles. Tiny fractures initially, split seconds where the mask slips, where they are a breath away from confessing, nearly showing their hand, inches from letting you witness the terrifying depth of their devotion. But instantly, they retreat with double the force because panic sets in. Terrified of their own capacity to love, horrified by the sheer volume of their emotions, paralyzed by their total loss of authority over their own heart. This births a toxic loop that grows progressively volatile. Every inch they step forward triggers massive alarm bells, causing them to bolt, which ironically forces the affection to surge even higher. Ultimately, this pendulum swings hard enough to shatter them. Not on the surface. To the world, they remain stoic, capable, and perfectly governed. But beneath the skin, there is absolute anarchy. You introduced an emotional riddle they lack the tools to unravel. They crave your presence, yet this craving feels like a death sentence to their ego. They feel spiritually tethered to you, yet maintaining that tie demands dropping their shields, and lowering their guard is the precise nightmare their walls were engineered to prevent. Consequently, they are trapped in a purgatory of lust and terror, hovering between absolute reality and aggressive delusion, paralyzed at the crossroads of evolution and retreat. Here is the nuance the majority of people completely miss. This goes far beyond romantic stress. This is a crisis of self. If they decide to walk into your arms, they must shed their old skin, evolving into a being who is transparent, raw, and authentic. That fresh iteration of their personality feels alien, wobbly, and fiercely hazardous. Conversely, if they choose to flee, they do not outrun the ghost. They drag it along in their shadow. It haunts them silently, perpetually mutating into bitter remorse, into agonizing yearning, into the relentless echo of, "Did I just abandon my one shot at genuine magic?" That specific thought is the catalyst for their mental collapse. The safety net is entirely gone. They are left with two brutal roads: surrender to the love or waste the remainder of their days attempting to erase it. Erasing it proves far more difficult than they calculated, because you surpass being a simple flashback. You are permanently tattooed onto their psyche, acting as a motif, an emotional tripwire, a monument to a hunger they lack the vocabulary to describe. The harder they push the thoughts down, the more violently they explode back to the surface, invading their sleep, hijacking their daily focus, echoing loudly in the quiet gaps where the world goes dark and only your face remains. This represents the absolute pinnacle of their psychological strain. The human brain can only shoulder so much dissonance before it forces an ending, and endings are rarely smooth. They frequently manifest as a total snap, a singular event where the dam shatters and years of repressed emotion flood the room. Messy, raw, and entirely inevitable. Yet, the mystery hanging in the air just seconds before the explosion is this: what is the aftermath? What occurs the second the suppression fails? Make no mistake, that threshold is inches away. There is a specific fraction of time, right before the walls cave in, when their racing mind abruptly halts. Not a serene quiet, not a tranquil pause, but a heavy, breathless paralysis. As if a core piece of their spirit has officially resigned from lying. That is the exact second clarity emerges. Bare, unshielded, and deafeningly loud. because reaching this coordinate means escaping is no longer a physical option. They exhausted the tactic of running away. They burned through every distraction. They exhausted every excuse to label their feelings as a temporary glitch. But truth does not evaporate simply because it ruins their plans. The gravity they feel toward you has shifted to absolute certainty. Here is the pivot that rewrites the entire story. The sudden epiphany hits them that this battle was never about managing a crush. It was always about staring down the revelations those emotions brought to light, and those revelations were deeply horrifying. You did more than inspire romance. You shone a spotlight on the neglected sectors of their soul that were dying of thirst, desperate for intimacy, aching to be seen, begging for authenticity. This is the exact scene where the magic trick ends. They are stripped of their logical defenses. Pretending this is merely physical chemistry becomes a joke. They are cornered by the inquiry that has stalked them for months. Why them? Why does this specific human feel like the destination I was subconsciously hiking toward my entire life? Finding that answer brings zero comfort. It is messy. It defies all logic and standard reasoning. Because their devotion to you is tangled in the unresolved chapters of their history, trauma they buried under so much dirt, they nearly convinced themselves the grave was empty. But the shadowed mind holds on to every receipt. It patiently seeks a reflection. You walked in and served as that exact looking glass. Yet, you did more than just show them their current state. You displayed the brilliant potential of who they might have become. That specific epiphany slices to the bone. Loving you now transcends simply wanting you in their bed. It becomes a mourning process for the alternate reality they murdered out of fear. A timeline where they remain soft, fearless, and brave enough to stand still when genuine love knocked on the door. This realization brings them to their absolute knees. Every hour they waste pushing you away registers as an insult to that lost potential. Conversely, every inch they crawl in your direction feels like free falling into a black hole they lack the tools to navigate. Yet, this is the magnificent turning point. The realization sets in that the safe harbor burned down. The gray area is gone. Loving someone with this magnitude guarantees irreversible, fundamental transformation. There is no escaping the metamorphosis. Consequently, they are staring down a choice that is barely a choice, because pain is the entry fee for both gates. Choosing to retreat guarantees losing your presence. Far worse, it kills their only opportunity to resurrect the glorious version of themselves you helped them see. That specific grief never truly washes out. It stains. It ferments into bitter what-ifs, a phantom pain striking their chest decades from now for reasons they refuse to admit aloud. But marching toward your light demands burning their rulebook. It requires incinerating the armored persona that successfully shielded them from harm. It shatters the fantasy that they can navigate life without ever bleeding. And to an ego wired for survival, dropping the shield is synonymous with death. This brings us to the ultimate climax. The exact juncture where the fortress turns to ash, their clever excuses evaporate, and stark reality commands the room. They are not merely experiencing romantic affection. Your very existence is rewriting their DNA. Metamorphosis is a brutal master. It demands total destruction prior to resurrection. It burns down the lies to excavate the gold. It demands a war before granting peace. This explains the terrifying gravity of the situation, the suffocating weight, the sheer impossibility of looking away. Because this encounter was never designed for comfort. It was engineered to break them open. Yet, here is the ultimate, inescapable reality. They did not consent to falling this hard, but the next move belongs entirely to them. And that single decision will forge their legacy, impacting not merely today, but echoing through the remainder of their timeline. History does not record the battles we fled. It remembers the fires that forged us into entirely new beings. and your role transcends being a sweet memory in their biography. You represent an absolute crossroads, a fatal crack in their outdated armor, a portal to a realm they have dodged for an eternity. That gate is now unlatched. It refuses to swing shut again, because once the shadow self steps into the light, once authenticity is tasted, and the facade is ripped away, reverting to their past self is a biological impossibility. The only options are marching into the fire or running back to the cold. Both exact a heavy toll, yet only one grants them an authentic life. And buried in the dark, they are completely.